welcome to this guide to conditioning. Conditioning is one of the most profound things that we deal with in this life. It is something that is ancient in understanding. The ancient Buddhists were well aware of the fact that we are deeply, deeply impacted by conditioning. Conditioning is everywhere. It is the very nature of the Maya. And we are designed as beings on this plane to operate within this Maya, but it does not mean that we have to be in the thrall of the program. It does not mean that it is the conditioning that determines what happens to us in our lives. It doesn't. The beauty of human design is that it gives you a way to navigate on this plane according to your own authority, a place within you that you can trust absolutely, and a place that not only can you trust absolutely, but has nothing to do with the way in which your mind would make a decision. The mind making decisions is not an isolated phenomenon. Take a look at your design or any design. And what you get to see is that there is this combination between what is activated and what is not. That is, what is colored in and what is white or open. It is the basic binary of the way in which we operate. And as bioforms, we operate under a genetic imperative. That genetic imperative demands that we be attracted to what we are not. As a species, in order to stay alive as a species, we need to reproduce, and reproduction, it benefits from difference. So we are designed genetically to be attracted to what we're not. So all of those places in your design that are white, all of those places that are open, these are places that have a tremendous power over us. In other words, we are receptors looking for, waiting for, wondering whether we'll ever get what's on the other end. And therein, of course, lies the trap. We are connected to that thing that is not us, and it begins to control the way in which we operate. So conditioning is a deeply powerful force in our life. And not only do we receive conditioning from those that are around us in our auric to aura connection with others, but we receive direct conditioning from the transiting field. And it is this transiting field that so often dictates what life is going to look like on any given day. Any given day. Let's take a look at what it means to be not self in terms of the way in which your mind operates. I have a chart for you today that we're going to use as an example. And if you take a look at this chart, you will see that it is a triple split definition projector. That is a triple split in that it has three different areas of definition, and they're not connected to each other. So three different parts in this particular being. And it's interesting in terms of conditioning that the triple split definition and the single definition, those beings who have all of their aspects connected to each other, that they have something in common. They're both deeply conditioned by open centers. Now, each open center, not only is it a source of attraction, but it is also a force that works on the way in which the mind is going to make its decisions as not self. Now take a look at this particular example. What you see in this example is that we have two open centers. We have an undefined heart center and we have an undefined sacral center. Now each of them have a not self purpose. In the undefined heart center, about 2/3 of humanity have an undefined heart center. And in essence, it represents one of the deepest conditioning dilemmas on our plane. This person, along with all those who have an undefined heart center, are always caught in a not self purpose of having to prove that they're worthy, having to prove themselves. And of course, having to prove yourself, that open heart center impacts the way in which the mind is going to make a decision. The not self being, this not self being, somebody calls them up on the phone and says, I've got this thing that I'd like you to do. It's really horrible and awful and so forth and so on, but I would really like you to do it. And of course, what happens to this not self being with its undefined heart center is that its mind is already thinking, well, it's going to be awful, but I better do it, because if I don't do it, they're not going to think that I'm worthy. They're not going to think that I'm a good person. They're not going to think that I'm a valued friend, whatever the case may be. And out of that open heart center and its influence on the mind, they're going to end up making a decision that has absolutely nothing to do with them, that is not correct for them. And you know what happens when you make those kinds of decisions. You end up doing that thing and you can't stand doing it. And it puts you in a very bad frame, and it creates problems in the end, and you don't necessarily do it well. It's so important to understand that the openness that's there in us is constantly open to pulling us away from our nature. I mean, there's something to grasp about that basic design. What you see colored in here in this chart, what you see that's open. What's colored in is the student. And what's open is where you go to school. It's the things that you're here to learn. This is somebody that's here to learn what the heart center offers. It's here to learn what is really worthy and what isn't. It isn't about themselves. I always tell people who have an undefined heart center how lucky they are. They have nothing to prove in this life to themselves or to anyone else. But they are certainly here in their wisdom to be able to see what is worthy, what deserves approving, what is something that, is correct in that sense in relationship to the other. But it's not about them. Now, this person also has an undefined sacral center. The not self of the sacral center is always driving someone to never know when enough is enough. Here's somebody that never knows when enough is enough when it comes to trying to prove themselves to others. And they end up being a slave. And this is a projector. This is a non-energy type. And as a projector, it is very important for them not to be exhausted. And here's this not self-purpose of, never knowing when enough is enough and constantly trying to prove themselves, working harder than anybody else, longer than anybody else, doing those things that nobody else will do, never knowing when enough is enough, and then collapsing in exhaustion. The conditioning that is there in open centers. And you see, as long as your mind is deciding for you, you cannot escape the conditioning. It doesn't matter what you learned from me or anyone else. It doesn't matter that you understand this. Please recognize that your mind cannot stop conditioning. It is subject to it. It cannot stop it. The only thing that you can do to operate correctly on this plane is to navigate according to your strategy and your authority. So when that person calls you up and they say they have this terrible thing for you to do, that you're trusting your authority, and that your authority is more than likely going to say no thanks. More than likely. Not always. It's the other thing to grasp about authority and the program and conditioning as a whole. A conditioning element that happens to be there doesn't mean it's something for you to absolutely avoid. It doesn't. You're not here to get hooked by it on the mental plane. But at the same time, you have a way of navigating that is correct for you. If your strategy and authority embraces a conditioning element, there is nothing wrong with that. But it has to come out of your strategy and authority. Now, one of the things that I have always recommended to students in human design is that once you come to understand your own design, the basic structure of it, take a look at the daily program, the transit field. This is a tremendous way to learn about how you've been interacting in your life and how the influence of certain gates have transformed you when in fact they were never intended for you, that you have simply fallen into the program. And one of the keys in following the program is to take a look particularly at the outer planets. Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, they travel slowly. They stay in particular gates for a long period of time. In the case of Pluto, for years. And obviously, if that gate is going to make a difference in your life, then it's going to be a deep conditioning theme that you're dealing with. Imagine this design today. You can see in this design that the 10th gate in the G center, that the 10th gate is open. It's open. As a matter of fact, if that 10th gate were activated, this person would no longer be, in that sense, a projector. They would suddenly be an emotional manifester. And right now, and it's been true for a while, and it will last into the new year, we have Pluto in the 10th gate. So this person right now is under the influence of Pluto in that 10th gate. They don't feel like a projector. They don't feel what they normally feel when they don't have that aspect, that lower aspect of their design connected upwards to the throat. And you can see there's a number of ways that that can be connected through the 16th gate, the 20th gate, as well as the 10th gate. Any of those gates being activated is automatically going to bring that emotional root spleen in connection with the G in the throat, and you have a deep manifesting element. Now, the 10th gate is the gate of behavior. This is somebody that doesn't have a really fixed sense of how to behave. It's not consistent in their design. If they're going to operate correctly, ultimately their wisdom will be to know how to behave. That 10th gate connected to the 57 becomes the channel of perfected form, the intuition guiding the behavior. And this is somebody in their life, because that 10th gate can bridge that aspect of their split, that they're always looking for what is the right behavior for me. And if I had the right behavior, what a difference that would make in my life. So along comes Pluto. And Pluto enters into this 10th gate, and all of a sudden, this person doesn't have a hole there. All of a sudden, there is this powerful force hooking up the lower part of their split with the middle part of their split and creating this emotional manifesting power. All of a sudden, this is a projector that really feels empowered, that they're no longer feeling exhausted, that they're running on a totally different energy. I mean, right now we have Pluto in the 4th line. It is the line of the opportunist. And that line of the opportunist is all about taking advantage of the connections that one has. You know, to get a job from a friend of a friend, those kinds of things, to hook into the network. But it's also about not having anything to do with strangers. It's really about developing friendships. It's about developing connections with others that ultimately can be of value. And here is this being that is suddenly under the influence of Pluto here in this 10th gate, changing their behavior, turning them into a very powerful manifesting opportunist. And instead of waiting for the invitation, which is not self they didn't know about anyway, they're powering ahead on all of this energy. And the opportunities that they're going to get out of this, that 10th gate and the way it's going to influence their mind. Oh, finally, we can prove our worthiness because we've got this great opportunity to do this thing. You know, it's the kind of person that as a projector, there are certain jobs they could never do. You know, the kinds of jobs that simply require their constant physical effort and endurance. And here suddenly they're a manifester. And they're a manifester with that never know when enough is enough, have to prove their worthiness. And they're locked into their opportunistic behavior. And their mind is making decisions based on that. Well, suddenly things have changed for us. Boy, we feel better. Boy, we feel stronger. We can go out and do anything, you know, all of the things that is going to bring. And it's going to lead to decisions that ultimately, somewhere down the road, are just going to collapse. Because somewhere down the road, Pluto is going to move away from that 10th gate. And the moment that it moves away from that 10th gate, that whole energy field is going to collapse. Whatever that projector got themselves into, the work that they got themselves into, the relationships that they got themselves into, under that influence, they will all collapse. It is one of the most extraordinary ironies of all in the not-self world. How many relationships come into existence because of a transit? A transit. That people that ordinarily would not connect to each other are connected through a transit. And as I said, some of these transits are really long term. It can be years. And then one day, the wheel always turning, the planet leaves the gate, and the relationship begins to have problems. See, to be aware of conditioning, to understand that there are all these elements out there that are pulling on us mentally. And we had this ancient habit, this illusion habit, the assumption that our minds know how to truly navigate on this plane. They do not. Oh, the mind's a wonderful thing. It is deeply equipped in its capacity to do research, to measure. It is a marvelous thing to share with another, to commune through mind. And yet mind is not capable of guiding us on this plane because it is deeply, deeply embedded in our openness. And it is our openness that conditions the mind. This is not a being that has to spend their whole life trying to prove themselves. And this is what's going to happen to them. A whole life trying to prove themselves, and a life that's going to be conditioned on and off by the transiting field that's going to lead them into things that are not correct for them. They're a projector. They're an emotional projector. They're here to wait for the invitation. They're here to wait out their wave, their emotional wave, in order to find clarity. And only through that emotional clarity, and only through that invitation, are they going to be able to enter into those things that are truly for them, in which they are not reliant on a planet or a person to lock them into a mode that is not theirs, but to be able to flourish on this plane as themselves by operating correctly, by making decisions in the only way that you can successfully on this plane, with your inner authority. Conditioning. It's all around us. Beware.